Commander Vokter clicked his clawed fingers against the control panel as his scanners picked up the signal. A human cargo ship, alone and vulnerable, drifting through the outer edges of the Sol system. His reptilian eyes gleamed with satisfaction. This was going to be easy money. The ship was called Merchant's Hope. Vokter almost laughed at the name. Oh, these humans and their sentimental nonsense. The vessel looked exactly like every other human freighter he'd seen in the database. Big, slow, and completely defenseless. No escort ships. No military markings. Just a fat target waiting to be plucked. Distance? Vokter asked his navigation officer. 12,000 kilometers and closing, Commander. Perfect. Vokter leaned back in his command chair, his tail swishing with anticipation. In his 15 years of raiding across the galaxy, he'd intercepted over 200 merchant vessels. The routine was always the same. Show up with superior firepower, demand surrender, take the cargo, leave the crew alive with enough supplies to call for rescue. Clean, efficient, profitable. And humans? They were the easiest targets of all. Everyone in the raiding business knew it. Humans loved their trade routes and their commerce. They built massive cargo ships but barely armed them. They talked about peace and cooperation at every Galactic Council meeting. They were merchants, not warriors. Soft, predictable, profitable. Vokter's first mate, a scarred veteran named Rek, moved closer to the command station. Commander, should we run a deep scan? Standard security check. Vokter waved his hand dismissively. Why waste time? Look at it, Rek. It's a standard civilian transport. We've seen 1,000 just like it. Rek nodded but still looked uncertain. The humans have been quiet lately. Fewer ships on the outer routes. Some of the other raiding clans have reported strange incidents. Strange how? Vokter asked, though he wasn't really interested. Other clans always had excuses when they failed to meet their quotas. Ships disappearing. Distress calls that cut off mid-transmission. The Vortex clan lost an entire strike team last month near the Centauri corridor. Vokter snorted. The Vortex clan are amateurs. They probably flew into an asteroid field while drunk on fermented spice. We're professionals, Rek. We don't make mistakes. His 3 warships moved into position, forming a perfect triangle around the human freighter. The Crithian vessels were sleek, deadly, armed with plasma cannons and ion disruptors. Against a civilian cargo hauler, they might as well have been battleships facing a child's toy. All ships in position, Commander, the tactical officer reported. Excellent. Charge weapons. Give them the standard warning shot across their bow. Let's not damage the cargo. The weapons systems hummed to life, orange lights flickering across the control panels. Vokter opened the communication channel, preparing to deliver the speech he'd given 100 times before. The one that always worked. The one that made captains realize they had no choice but to surrender. But something felt different this time. The human ship hadn't tried to run. That was the first unusual thing. Every merchant vessel, when faced with raiders, tried to flee. It was instinct. Even when they knew they couldn't outrun military-grade engines, they always tried. But this ship just sat there, floating in space like it had nowhere else to be. The second unusual thing was the power signature. Vokter's sensors officer had been monitoring it since they arrived, and instead of dropping, which was what ships did when they prepared to surrender, the readings were climbing. The reactor output was increasing. Why would a cargo ship need more power when surrounded by hostile vessels? Communication channel open, Commander, his comm officer announced. Vokter cleared his throat and activated his translator. Attention human vessel merchants Hope. This is Commander Vokter of the Crithian Free Fleet. You are surrounded and outgunned. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Comply immediately and no harm will come to your crew. Resist and we will disable your ship by force. You have 30 seconds to respond. He sat back, expecting the usual response. A frightened captain agreeing to terms. Maybe some bargaining. Perhaps a few tears. Humans were emotional creatures after all. Instead there was silence. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Rek shifted uncomfortably. Commander, their power levels are still rising. I can see that, Vokter snapped. Why aren't they responding? Then the communication channel crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, almost bored. Human, definitely, but with an edge of something Vokter couldn't quite identify. Not fear. Something else. Negative on that request, Commander Vokter. This is UHSV Merchant's Hope, Terran Defense Fleet Auxiliary Vessel, Captain Miho commanding. You have entered Terran-controlled space and have taken hostile actions against a military asset of Earth. Under Articles 12 and 15 of the Galactic Defense Treaty, you are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare to be taken into custody. You have 5 seconds to comply, or we will interpret your continued hostile posture as an act of war against the Terran Defense Fleet and respond accordingly. Voctor's mind went blank for a moment. Military asset? Terran Defense Fleet? But it was just a cargo ship. His scanner said it was a cargo ship. It looked like a cargo ship. It had to be a cargo ship. They're bluffing, Voctor said, though his voice lacked conviction. It's a trick. Fire the warning shot. Commander, wait, Rex started to say. But before anyone could finish their sentence, the human ship began to change. The hull plates, those innocent-looking panels that covered every merchant vessel, started to retract. Mechanical arms extended from the ship's body, pulling back sections of what Voctor had assumed was simple aluminum plating. Beneath those plates, where there should have been cargo holds and storage compartments, were weapon ports. Dozens of them. Gun turrets emerged from concealed bays, rotating into firing positions with mechanical precision. Point defense systems deployed along the ship's spine. Missile tubes opened like hungry mouths. The entire vessel transformed in less than 15 seconds, shedding its merchant disguise like a predator revealing its fangs. The power signature that had been climbing suddenly made perfect sense. Those weren't cargo bay reactors. That was military-grade power generation, the kind needed to run heavy weapon systems and defensive shields. Voctor's tactical display lit up like a festival celebration, warning icons appearing faster than he could count them. His computer was screaming at him in 3 different languages, trying to make him understand what every instinct in his body was already telling him. They weren't hunting a merchant ship. They had just walked into a trap. All ships evasive action. Voctor shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Scatter formation. Retreat 2. The human ship fired first. The first railgun round hit Voctor's flagship before his shields could even fully activate. It wasn't like the energy weapons the Crithians were used to. There was no bright plasma bolt, no glowing beam of concentrated light. Just a solid chunk of tungsten steel alloy, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, slamming into the side of his warship with the force of a small meteor. The impact was devastating. Voctor was thrown from his command chair as the entire ship lurched sideways. Alarms screamed from every console. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency red lighting that made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. Somewhere behind him, he heard the sound of metal tearing, atmosphere rushing out through a hull breach. Damage report, he screamed, pulling himself back to his feet. His engineering officer's hands were shaking as she worked her console. Forward shield generator is gone, Commander. Hull breach on decks 4 through 7. We've lost primary navigation and weapons control is offline. 1 shot. The humans had fired 1 shot and crippled a Crithian warship that had survived a dozen battles. Return fire. All weapons return fire now. But his weapons officer was staring at his screen in horror. Sir, I can't get a lock. The targeting computer it's like they're jamming us but not with jamming. They're feeding false data into our systems. Every time I try to lock on, the coordinates shift. On the main view screen, the human ship, if it could even be called a merchant ship anymore, was moving. Not fleeing. Not running away like prey should. It was advancing, closing the distance between them with calculated precision. Its weapon turrets tracked every movement of the Crithian vessels with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. Voctor's second escort ship, the Talon's Fury, opened fire with everything it had. Plasma bolts streaked across space, brilliant blue-white against the darkness. Ion disruptors lanced out, weapons that could shut down any ship's electronics in seconds. The human ship didn't even try to dodge. Instead, point defense systems activated along its hull. Small automated turrets, dozens of them, tracking incoming fire with computer-guided precision. They didn't stop every shot, that would have been impossible, but they didn't need to. They eliminated enough of the incoming fire to make the difference between survival and destruction. The plasma bolts that did connect splashed against the human ship's shields like water against stone. The shields flickered, absorbed the energy and held. These weren't civilian-grade shields. These were military defensive systems, the kind that could take sustained fire from multiple sources. Then the human ship returned fire again. This time it wasn't just railguns. Missile tubes opened along the ship's flanks, and dozens of small projectiles streaked out into space. Voctor's tactical officer identified them immediately. Smart missiles, the kind with their own guidance systems and maneuvering thrusters. Countermeasures. Voctor shouted. Deploy chaff, electronic interference, everything. The Krithian ships released clouds of metallic particles designed to confuse missile guidance systems. They activated broad-spectrum jamming. They fired their point-defense guns at the incoming threats. It didn't matter. The human missiles simply adjusted their flight paths, weaving through the countermeasures like they were alive. Like they were thinking. 3 of them slammed into the Talon's Fury in rapid succession. The first missile punched through the shields. The second and third hit bare hull, and the explosions tore through the ship's superstructure like it was made of paper. The Talon's Fury broke apart, splitting into 3 large pieces that tumbled away into the darkness, trailing debris and escaping atmosphere. Just like that, Vokter had lost a third of his strike force. "Commander, we need to retreat." Rek was shouting beside him. "This isn't a merchant ship, this is a warship. We can't win this fight." But before Vokter could give the order, his sensor officer made a sound. A small, broken whimper that sent ice through Vokter's veins. "Commander, we have new contacts." Multiple new contacts decloaking around our position. The main view screen shifted, and Vokter felt his heart sink into his stomach. 3 more human ships materialized out of empty space, their stealth systems deactivating in perfect synchronization. These weren't disguised as merchant vessels. These were proper warships, sleek, angular, covered in weapon emplacements and armor plating. Their hull designations were visible even from this distance. UHSV Retribution. UHSV Vendetta. UHSV Reckoning. They had been there the entire time. Hidden. Waiting. Watching as Vokter's fleet moved into position. Watching as they surrounded the bait ship. Watching as they prepared to spring their trap. Except the Krithians weren't the ones who had set the trap. "They were waiting for us," Vokter whispered, the realization crushing him like a physical weight. "This whole thing, they knew we were coming. They wanted us to attack." The 3 warships didn't broadcast warnings or demands. They simply opened fire. The space around Vokter's fleet erupted in a storm of metal and fire. Railgun rounds hammered into his remaining escort ship from 3 different angles. Missiles traced brilliant contrails through the void. Energy weapons, pulse lasers that the humans must have developed recently, cut through shields like they weren't even there. His last escort ship, the Shadow's Edge, managed to return fire for about 10 seconds before a railgun round struck its reactor housing. The explosion was brief but brilliant, a miniature sun blooming in the darkness before fading to nothing. 2 ships destroyed. 2 out of 3. And now all 4 human vessels were focusing their attention on Vokter's flagship. "Shields at 18%, his engineering officer reported. "Hull breaches on 12 decks. Life support is failing in sections B through F. Weapons are completely offline." Vokter stared at the view screen, watching the human ships approach in perfect formation. They moved like a pack of predators surrounding wounded prey, coordinated and efficient. This wasn't random. This wasn't improvised. This was doctrine. This was training. This was what these ships and these crews were designed to do. "They've been hunting us," Rex said quietly beside him. "Not just today. Not just our fleet. They've been hunting all of us. All the raiding clans. This is what happened to the Vortex clan. This is why ships have been disappearing." The communication channel crackled to life again. The same calm human voice from before, Captain Miho, speaking as if he was discussing the weather rather than the complete destruction of a raiding fleet. "Commander Vokter, this is your final warning. Power down all remaining weapons systems and prepare to be boarded. Your shields are failing, your weapons are offline, and you have nowhere to run. You have 30 seconds to comply. If you refuse, we will destroy your ship and there will be no survivors. The choice is yours." Vokter looked around his bridge. At his crew, their faces pale with fear. At the sparking consoles and the emergency lights. At the tactical display showing his ship's failing systems. He had entered this battle with 3 warships and over 400 crew members. He had expected an easy target, quick profit, and no complications. Instead, he had walked into a carefully prepared ambush orchestrated by a species he had completely underestimated. A species that had turned one of their merchant vessels into a weapon, hidden 3 warships in plain sight, and destroyed his entire fleet in less than 5 minutes. Vokter reached for his communication console with a trembling hand. "This is Commander Vokter," he said, his voice hollow. We surrender." Captain Miho stood perfectly still on the bridge of the Merchant's Hope, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the Krithian commander's surrender message come through. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise and practiced. There were no celebrations, no cheers of victory. This was just another day's work. Boarding teams, prepare to secure the enemy vessel, Miho said calmly into his headset. Medical teams on standby. I want prisoners treated according to Galactic Convention standards. No exceptions. His executive officer, Lieutenant Deho, approached from the tactical station. Sir, the Crithian flagship is powering down its remaining systems. No signs of resistance. The other 2 destroyers are maintaining perimeter positions. Miho nodded. Good. Have the Retribution and Vendetta hold their positions. The Reckoning can assist with boarding operations. He paused, then added, and make sure our legal officer is recording everything. Every communication, every action. I want this completely documented. This was the 3rd pirate fleet Miho's task force had eliminated in 6 months. The 3rd time they'd used Operation Mousetrap, the Terran Defense Fleet's new strategy for dealing with the raiding problem that had plagued human merchant routes for years. The concept was brilliantly simple. Instead of trying to patrol every trade route with expensive warships, instead of hoping to catch raiders in the act, the humans had decided to become the bait. They took ordinary military vessels, disguised them as merchant ships, and sent them out along routes known for pirate activity. Then they waited. Pirates, after all, were predictable. They looked for easy targets. They attacked what appeared weak. They never expected the prey to have teeth. Deho pulled up a tactical display showing the engagement data. Sir, total engagement time was 4 minutes and 37 seconds from first shot to enemy surrender. 2 enemy vessels destroyed, 1 captured. 0 damage to our fleet. Casualties on the enemy ships? Miho asked. Scanning now, sir. The Talon's Fury lost all hands when the reactor went critical. The Shadow's Edge. Approximately 60% casualties from the reactor explosion and subsequent decompression. The flagship has significant damage, but most of the crew survived. Miho felt a momentary weight in his chest. War was never clean, never simple, no matter how justified. Those Crithian crews had families, lives, dreams. But they had also chosen to become predators, to attack civilian vessels, to terrorize merchant crews who had no way to defend themselves. Make sure our medical teams prioritize the wounded prisoners, Miho said. I want every survivor who can be saved to walk away from this. Sir? Deho looked confused. They're pirates. They wouldn't have shown our people any mercy. That's exactly why we're different from them, Lieutenant. Miho turned to face his officer. We're not murderers. We're protectors. There's a difference. But mercy wasn't the only reason to keep prisoners alive. It was also strategic. On the main view screen, Miho could see the communication logs scrolling past. Everything from this engagement, every tactical decision, every weapon fired, every moment of the battle, was being broadcast on open channels across multiple frequencies. Not just local communications. They were using FTL relay buoys to send this data to every known pirate haven, smuggler port and raider outpost within 50 light-years. The message was simple and brutal. Attacking human ships was no longer profitable. It was suicide. Sir, we're receiving the sensor data from the Crithian flagship now, the intelligence officer called out. Their communications logs show they've been operating in this sector for over 5 years. 17 confirmed attacks on civilian vessels, 12 of them human ships. Miho walked over to review the data. Lists of ships, dates, cargo stolen, crew members killed or abandoned. Each entry was a story of terror, of people just trying to make a living who were attacked by predators. Cross-reference these attacks with our missing ship reports, Miho ordered. And make sure this data gets sent to the Galactic Council. Let them see exactly what we've been dealing with. His tactical officer, a young woman named Saman, spoke up from her station. Captain, we're getting communication requests from the other destroyers. Captains Jaiwan and Hyojin report their ships are ready for the next phase. The next phase. The part of the operation that Miho personally found most satisfying. Open a channel to all ships, Miho said. And broadcast it on every pirate frequency we have in the database. A moment later, his communication officer nodded. Channels open, sir. You're broadcasting to approximately 200 known pirate vessels across this sector. Miho took a breath, then spoke clearly into the microphone. This is Captain Miho of the United Human Space Vessel Merchants Hope, broadcasting to all vessels receiving this transmission. Today the Terran Defense Fleet destroyed the Crithian raiding fleet under Commander Voctor. 3 warships attacked what they believed was a defenseless merchant vessel. 2 of those warships no longer exist. The 3rd is now in our custody, and its crew will face trial for piracy under Galactic Council law. He paused, letting that sink in for anyone listening. 4 years, Pirates have operated along human trade routes with near impunity. You've attacked our merchants, stolen our cargo, and killed our people. You did this because you believed we were weak. Because we preferred commerce to conflict. Because we talked about peace at every opportunity. On the view screen, Miho could see the Krithian flagship, its hull scarred and broken, atmosphere still venting from a dozen breaches. You mistook our preference for peace as an inability to wage war. That was your mistake. The human species spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare before we ever left our homeworld. We know how to fight. We choose not to, until we have no other choice. Daiho was watching his captain with something like awe. They'd all heard rumors about Earth's violent history, but most species in the galaxy dismissed them as exaggerations. This engagement was not an accident, Miho continued. This was not luck. This was planned. We designed these tactics specifically to hunt pirates who prey on our ships. The Merchant's Hope is not the only Q-ship in operation. There are dozens more like her, operating across human space right now. Every one of them looks like an easy target. Every one of them is a trap. The bridge was completely silent except for the soft hum of electronics and the captain's voice. To any pirate listening to this broadcast, understand this clearly: the hunting season on human vessels is over. If you attack our ships, you will not face merchants armed with prayers and hopes. You will face military vessels with the training and weapons to destroy you completely. The choice is yours. Leave our ships alone and you'll never hear from us again. Attack us and you'll discover exactly what humanity learned over 10,000 years of warfare. Miho ended the transmission and turned back to his crew. Several of them were smiling now, pride evident on their faces. Sir, that was something, Salmon said. That was necessary, Miho replied. Words are weapons too, Lieutenant. Sometimes they're more effective than railguns. He looked at the tactical display at the data streaming in from across the sector. Already they were picking up chatter on pirate channels. Panic, confusion, fear. Good. Daiho, begin boarding operations. I want every piece of intelligence from that ship. Navigation logs, communication records, information about their network. Everything. Yes, sir. Miho walked back to his command chair and sat down. Through the view screen he could see the stars, unchanged and eternal. Somewhere out there, other pirates were receiving his message, watching the footage of this battle, realizing that the galaxy had just changed. Humanity had been patient. They had tried diplomacy, tried cooperation, tried working through official channels. And when none of that worked, when their people kept dying, they had done what humans had always done throughout their history. They had adapted. They had prepared. And they had shown their predators that even prey could have fangs. Commander Voctor sat in what remained of his command chair, surrounded by sparking consoles and the acrid smell of burning electronics. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, making the bridge look like the inside of a wound. Through the cracked view screen, he could see the human warships maintaining their positions, silent, watchful, like sharks circling injured prey. His crew worked frantically to seal hull breaches and restore life support to the damaged sections. The sounds of their efforts, shouted orders, hissing atmosphere seals, the whine of emergency power, created a chaotic symphony that Voctor barely heard. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the last 5 minutes over and over, trying to understand how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. 15 years. 15 years of successful raids, of easy profits, of merchant ships surrendering without a fight. And now, in less time than it took to eat a meal, his entire fleet had been annihilated by the very species he'd considered the softest targets in the galaxy. Commander, the humans are requesting permission to board. Rex's voice broke through his thoughts. His first mate looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last few minutes. They say they have medical teams ready to treat our wounded. Voctor almost laughed. Medical teams. The humans who had just destroyed 2 of his ships and killed hundreds of his crew were now offering medical assistance. It was almost insulting. Almost. Grant them permission, Voctor said quietly. We have no choice. As Rek relayed the message, Voctor's communications officer, a young Krithian named Telva, made a small noise of distress at her station. Commander, you need to see this. What now? Voctor's voice was flat, emotionless. What more could possibly go wrong? The humans, they're broadcasting everything. The entire battle. They're sending it out on every known pirate frequency, every smuggler channel, every raider network in the sector. Her hands trembled as she worked her console. They're not just sending it. They're repeating it on loop using FTL relay buoys. Within an hour, every pirate organization within 50 light-years will have seen this footage. The implications hit Voctor like a physical blow. The humans weren't just defeating pirate fleets. They were destroying the reputation, the fear factor, the psychological advantage that raiders had always relied on. Every pirate in the sector would see this footage. They would see 3 Crithian warships, experienced, well-armed, dangerous, get torn apart by humans in less than 5 minutes. "They're making an example of us," Rex said quietly. "They're showing everyone what happens when you attack their ships." Voctor's intelligence officer, an older Crithian named Dorsek, suddenly spoke up from his station. His voice was shaking. "Commander, I think I made a terrible mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Voctor asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "When we first spotted the human ship, I should have run a background check. Protocol requires it, but I didn't. I thought it was just a standard merchant vessel, and we'd done hundreds of these raids, so I skipped the procedure." Dorsek's scales had turned pale with fear. "I just ran one now. Commander, the databases have information about human military capabilities. A lot of information. I should have looked before we attacked." "Show me," Voctor ordered. Dorsek transferred the data to the main view screen, and what Voctor saw made his blood run cold. The screen filled with historical records from Earth, the human homeworld. Wars. Thousands of them. Spanning thousands of years. The humans called them different things: world wars, civil wars, conflicts, operations, but they all amounted to the same thing. Organized, systematic violence on a scale that most species had never experienced. One section caught Voctor's attention. Something called World War II. The casualty figures were, they couldn't be real. 70 million dead? In a single conflict? On one planet? "Keep reading," Dorsek said miserably. "It gets worse." The data scrolled onward. Humans had developed nuclear weapons, devices capable of destroying entire cities, within a century of industrialization. They had pointed these weapons at each other for decades in something called the Cold War, living under the constant threat of mutual annihilation. And somehow, impossibly, they had survived without destroying themselves. More data appeared. Military tactics, strategies, doctrines developed over millennia. The humans had names for everything: flanking maneuvers, guerrilla warfare, siege tactics, psychological operations. They had entire academic institutions dedicated to studying warfare, to making it more efficient, more deadly, more precise. "Look at this section," Dorsek said, highlighting another file. "Q-ships. The tactic the humans used against us today. They've been using it for over 400 years. It's not new. It's not experimental. It's traditional." Voctor stared at the screen, reading about ancient human naval vessels disguised as merchant ships, luring submarines and raiders to their destruction. The tactic was older than most spacefaring civilizations. The humans had been perfecting the art of the trap since before they left their own oceans. "Why didn't anyone know about this?" Voctor asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why isn't this information common knowledge?" "It is, Commander," Dorsek replied. "It's all in the public Galactic Council databases. Anyone can access it. We never looked. None of us did. We saw that humans prefer trade and diplomacy, that they talk about peace constantly, and we assumed that meant they couldn't fight." Rek moved closer to the screen, reading over the data with growing horror. They spent their entire history learning how to kill each other more efficiently. They developed weapons during peacetime. They studied war like other species study art or music. And we thought they were soft because they chose not to use these skills unless necessary. Another section of data appeared, more recent information about human military structure. The Terran Defense Fleet wasn't just a navy. It was a complex, layered organization with specialized divisions, advanced training programs, and military academies that had been operating for centuries. They had strategic planning departments that modeled thousands of potential conflict scenarios. They had research divisions constantly developing new weapons and tactics. "Look at their doctrine here," Dorsek pointed at a specific file. "Anti-piracy operations. They have an entire strategic framework dedicated to eliminating raiders. Operation Mousetrap is just one of multiple programs. There are others: Operation Watchdog, Operation Crossroads, Operation Safeguard. They've been planning this for years." Voctor felt sick. They hadn't stumbled into a lucky encounter with a well-armed merchant ship. They had walked directly into a carefully orchestrated campaign designed specifically to hunt and eliminate pirate fleets exactly like his. The humans hadn't gotten lucky. They had prepared. They had studied. They had planned. And Voctor's arrogance, his assumption that humans were weak, had led his entire fleet into a trap that had been waiting for someone exactly like him. "The other clans that went missing," Rex said slowly, realization dawning. The Vortex Clan, the Shadow Reapers, the Red Dawn Fleet. They didn't disappear because of accidents or bad luck. The humans killed them all, didn't they? Probably, Dorsek confirmed, pulling up more data. And they broadcast each victory just like they're broadcasting ours. They're systematically eliminating every pirate fleet that preys on their merchant vessels, and they're making sure everyone knows about it. A human boarding party was approaching the ship now. Voctor could see them on the external cameras. They moved with military precision, weapons ready but not aggressive. They looked professional, trained, competent. Not like merchants playing at being soldiers. Like actual soldiers who had spent years learning their craft. "Commander," Telva said from her communication station, "I'm picking up chatter on the pirate networks. Other clans are reacting to the broadcast. Some are panicking. Others are issuing orders to avoid human ships entirely. The Dark Star Syndicate just sent out a fleet-wide directive prohibiting any attacks on human vessels. Within hours, the entire balance of power in the sector would shift. Pirates who had operated with near impunity would suddenly find themselves afraid of merchant ships. The predators had become the prey, and it had happened so fast that most of them still didn't understand what had changed." Voctor looked around his destroyed bridge, at his terrified crew, at the data still scrolling across the viewscreen showing humanity's long, bloody history of warfare. He had made the worst mistake a predator could make. He had mistaken patience for weakness, preference for inability, choice for limitation. The humans hadn't been unable to fight back. They had simply been choosing not to, hoping that diplomacy and cooperation would work. And when those failed, when their patience ran out, they had done what they'd always done throughout their violent history. They had gone to war. And they were very, very good at it. 6 weeks after the Merchant's Hope incident, the ripple effects were still spreading across the galaxy like waves from a stone dropped in still water. In every pirate haven, smuggler port, and raider outpost, the conversation was the same. The humans had changed the rules of the game and nobody knew quite what to do about it. On the orbital station known as Blackport, a notorious gathering place for pirates and smugglers on the edge of civilized space, a meeting was taking place that would have been unthinkable just 2 months earlier. 23 different pirate clans, some of whom had been rivals for decades, sat around a table trying to figure out how to deal with the human problem. Krivax, leader of the Crimson Blade Syndicate, slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. We're letting one species dictate terms to all of us? We outnumber them. We have more ships." An older pirate, a Valorian named Synthra who had been raiding for 40 years, shook her head slowly. "Numbers don't matter if you're dead before you realize you're in a fight. I lost 3 ships last week. 3. They attacked what looked like a passenger liner. It turned out to be another one of those Q ships. My crews didn't even have time to surrender." Around the table, similar stories emerged. The Dark Star Syndicate had lost 5 ships. The Void Hunters had lost 7. The Shadow Reapers, once one of the most feared pirate fleets in the sector, had been completely wiped out in a single engagement with human forces. "It's not just the Q ships," another pirate added. "They're hunting us now. Actively hunting us. They've got some kind of intelligence network tracking our movements. They know our routes, our bases, our communication frequencies. It's like they've been studying us for years." They had been, of course. While the pirates were getting rich attacking merchant vessels, human intelligence services had been quietly building databases, tracking patterns, identifying key players. They had been patient, gathering information, waiting for the right moment to act. And when that moment came, they struck with overwhelming force. The footage from the Merchant's Hope engagement had been viewed millions of times across pirate networks. Every raider in the galaxy had seen it by now. The speed of the human response, the precision of their tactics, the cold efficiency with which they destroyed ships that dared to attack them. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and it was working. Insurance companies in civilized space had noticed the change immediately. Premiums for attacking human vessels had skyrocketed overnight. Some insurance providers refused to cover raids on human ships at all, declaring them too high risk. Meanwhile, insurance rates for human merchant vessels had dropped to historic lows. The economic calculations that made piracy profitable were rapidly falling apart. But the changes went deeper than economics. In the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime, an emergency session was being held to discuss the human anti-piracy campaign. Several council members, particularly those whose species operated independent salvage operations that looked suspiciously like piracy, had filed formal complaints against Earth's military actions. The human ambassador, a sharp-eyed woman named Minji, stood before the council with a datapad in hand and no trace of apology in her expression. Let me make sure I understand the complaints correctly, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Multiple council members are upset that Earth has taken decisive action to protect our merchant vessels from pirate attacks. Is that accurate? A Thalasian council member, his tentacles rippling with indignation, responded. Your tactics are excessive. The destruction of entire pirate fleets, the deployment of disguised military vessels. These actions violate the spirit of the Merchant Protection Accords. Minji's smile was cold and sharp. The Merchant Protection Accords were supposed to provide protection through council peacekeeping forces. For 15 years, human ships have been filing complaints about pirate attacks. For 15 years, we followed proper procedures, submitted incident reports, requested assistance. Do you know how many of those requests resulted in action? 7. 7 out of over 4,000 complaints. The chamber fell silent. We asked for help through proper channels, Minji continued, her voice hardening. We tried diplomacy. We tried cooperation. And while we were trying, 347 human crew members were killed by pirates. Another 2,000 were injured or traumatized. Billions of credits worth of cargo was stolen. Entire trade routes became too dangerous to use. She pulled up a holographic display showing attack statistics, casualty reports, economic impact data. The numbers were damning. So yes, we took matters into our own hands. We used our own military to protect our own people when the council failed to do so. And if you consider that excessive, then I would invite you to explain to the families of those 347 dead crew members why protecting human lives is considered inappropriate. Nobody had a response to that. Back on Earth, in the Terran Defense Fleet headquarters, Captain Miho was being honored in a ceremony that would have made him uncomfortable if he'd been the type to care about such things. He stood at attention while Fleet Admiral Tion pinned a medal to his uniform and spoke about courage, innovation, and the protection of human lives. When it was his turn to speak, Miho kept it brief. We did what needed to be done. The pirates thought we were easy targets because we preferred peace. They learned otherwise. That's all. But it wasn't all, and everyone in the room knew it. Operation Mousetrap had fundamentally changed the dynamics of interstellar commerce. Human merchant vessels, once considered the softest targets in space, were now avoided by pirates the way fish avoid sharks. Trade routes that had been dangerous for years were suddenly safe again. More importantly, other species were taking notice. 3 other civilizations had approached Earth asking about Q-ship designs and anti-piracy tactics. The humans, surprisingly, had been willing to share, not for profit, but because every species that adopted these tactics was one less target for pirates, which made all merchant vessels safer. Commander Vokter, meanwhile, sat in a Galactic Council detention facility awaiting trial. He had become something of an accidental celebrity, the pirate who had attacked the wrong ship and lived to tell about it. News agencies from across the galaxy had interviewed him, always asking the same questions. What happened? How did the humans defeat you so quickly? What advice would you give other pirates? His answer was always the same, and it had become a viral quote repeated across 1,000 worlds. We thought they were weak because they chose commerce over conflict. We thought their patience meant they couldn't fight. We were wrong. Don't make our mistake. Don't attack human ships. They've forgotten more about warfare than most species ever learned. The survivors from his crew told similar stories. They spoke about the precision of human tactics, the efficiency of their weapons, the cold professionalism of their military forces. They talked about a species that had spent thousands of years learning to fight and had simply been choosing not to use those skills until they had no other choice. The message spread. It evolved. It grew. Within 3 months of the Merchant's Hope incident, attacks on human vessels had dropped by 94%. The few pirates foolish enough to try found themselves facing the same fate as Vokter's fleet, outgunned, outmaneuvered, and utterly destroyed. Some pirate clans actually disbanded entirely, their leaders declaring that the risk was no longer worth the reward. Others shifted their focus to different targets, carefully avoiding anything with human markings. A few even offered their services as escorts for human convoys, figuring that protection money was safer and more reliable than robbery. The galaxy was learning a lesson that Earth had known for millennia. Peace wasn't weakness. Patience wasn't inability. And choosing not to fight didn't mean you couldn't fight. It just meant you were waiting for the right moment. The humans had been patient for 15 years. They had tried every diplomatic option, every peaceful solution. And when none of that worked, when their people kept dying, they had done exactly what their history suggested they would do. They had stopped being patient. In the months and years that followed, the Merchant's Hope became legendary. Not just among humans but across the entire galaxy. The ship that had changed everything. The trap that had proven humanity wasn't prey, they were predators who had simply been choosing to hunt. And now everyone knew it. The hunting season on human vessels was over. A new reality had emerged, one where attacking a human ship wasn't an opportunity for easy profit. It was a death sentence delivered by a species that had mastered warfare before most civilizations had discovered fire. The message was clear, simple, and impossible to ignore. Humans had offered peace. They had preferred cooperation. They had chosen commerce over conflict. But when pushed, when their patience ran out, when their people were threatened, they would do what they had always done throughout their long violent history. They would fight. And they would win. That was the new reality. And the galaxy would never forget it.